Welcome back everyone, and this week we're going to be creating a splash screen, or a main menu for your game. We'll be dividing this into two parts. This first video will be all about creating the artwork for the menu, and at least one button for that menu. The next video will be about how to bring this artwork into Unity, hook it up with some code, and make it actually function in your game. Now, while a main menu, or a splash screen, might not seem like a big deal for your game, it's really the very first thing that players see when they sign in. So whether it's just eye-catching, or immersive and making you feel like you're already in the game, or just functional, your main menu is actually pretty important. Okay, so how are we going to go about actually creating our own splash screens for our games? Well, first, let's jump into Photoshop. Then we'll go to File and New. In our new document settings, make sure that the width and height are set to pixels. And then set the width to 1440 pixels and the height to 900 pixels. I also recommend putting the resolution at 300 pixels per inch. Might as well give this a name right up front and call this splash screen, and then I'll hit OK. So now we've got a blank image to get started with. Now, if you are an artistic person, if you're good in Photoshop, if you like to draw, I highly recommend that you use some of your own original artwork in this. And if you do, I'm going to give you a big pile of extra credit points. Just make sure that I know that you were using original art. You can mention that in the comments on Schoology. But even if you're not super artistic, let's find a way to make a pretty good splash screen for our game. For example, let's go find an image that'll help us get started. So I'm going to stick with the idea of the malaria prevention game that we all test played at the beginning of this last quarter. So let's say I want to create a splash screen for my game that is themed on malaria prevention. Well, let's go to Google Images and see what I can find. So I tried Googling other things first, like I tried malaria prevention, I tried research lab, and I wasn't super happy with any of the stuff I was finding there. But when I Googled malaria research, I see things that actually look like, I could use some of these images as some of the artwork for my splash screen. For right now, I'll keep it simple. This one looks like it's almost ready to go. So I'm going to save this either by control-clicking and hitting Save Image As, or oftentimes you can just click and drag this image out onto your desktop. Make sure though that you're getting the full image and not the thumbnail. This is going to be the first thing that our players see when they jump in our game, so make sure that it's at least a good quality image. And again, the more work you put into this, especially if you use custom artwork, the more extra credit points there are to earn. Now this image fits in here almost perfectly already, so I might pull up my filter gallery and see what I can do to kind of still see what's going on here, but make it feel a little bit less up front and make it feel a little bit more in the background. So I think what I've settled on is using the sketch settings here and using the water paper. And then I'm turning down the brightness, I'm turning down the contrast, I'm turning up the fiber length. So this feels a little more like something in the background. You can still make out most of the shapes and what they're supposed to be, but when I put a brightly colored button on top of this, it's going to stand out and be noticeable that that's what I can click on, and the rest of this is just kind of artwork and thematic. Also, it's probably a good idea to include the title of your game in here. So I'm going to use my text tool to go ahead and put in Malaria Prevention Game. Keep in mind there's a lot of ways that you can spice up your text. If we double click on our text layer, we can pull up the layer style options. We can do things like bevel and emboss. We can do things like drop shadow. And each of these has a lot of settings that we can play with to tweak this and make it look more interesting. So take your time and make it look nice. Now when it's time to save this and get it ready for Unity, we need to click Save As, and then change it from Photoshop to PNG. Then let's clean up the end of this and just change this to be splashscreen.png. And then we'll hit save. But before we jump into Unity, there's one more thing that I want you to make in Photoshop. So we're going to be creating at least one button, the button that lets the player start the game. You may choose to add more buttons down the road if you want to give your player the ability to choose a specific level or change some settings about your game. But for now, let's just start with one. An easy way to start this process is to think about how big do you want your button to be on the screen. So if this is our splash screen, this is exactly what the player is going to see when they come in the game. I'm going to take my rectangle select tool, and I'll imagine that maybe I want the start game button to be right about here and about this size. So I'm going to take my rectangle select tool, take this selection right here. Now, I'm not even going to do anything on this page. I'm just going to, after making this selection, hit Command C to copy that size. Then I'm going to hit Command N to open a new document, and it knows what size I want already because it's copying the size that I have selected here. So I didn't know these numbers, I just knew this is the size I wanted, and it says, okay, that's 383 by 179. And I'm going to call this Start Button, and then hit OK. Now, I don't really want to paste anything here because I don't need to see this chunk of my screen, so I'm not even going to bother with the paste. All I want this to be is a good space to design the button. So firstly, I probably don't really want a white background. So if you have a white background here from your default settings, go ahead and double click on background and then just click OK. And I can just turn this white layer on or off as I need it. If I want a white background while I'm working so that I don't have to see this little checkerboard, that's fine. But before you finish and save this button, you probably want to turn this layer off because we don't really want a white rectangle around our button. So you could make your button whatever shape you want. You could hand draw your button, or you could just use some of Photoshop's tools to help you out. For example, we can take our shape drawing tool right here, and right now mine's set to line, but if I control click this, I get a whole list whether I choose a custom shape, or in this case, I'll just do an ellipse tool. I'm just going to create kind of an oval shaped button here. Now, this button on my screen happens to be purple at the moment because, well, that's what I have in my settings up here. Yours will probably look different, but I can change these. So this right here is the fill color. So maybe I don't want it to be purple in the middle. Maybe I want it to be kind of a bright blue. You'll notice the middle's pretty small right now and the border is pretty big because I happen to have my line settings at 10 point. So let's turn this down to like 1. And now I have a very small outline around the outside edge here. I probably don't want that edge to be purple. I'm going to go with something like a nice dark red. All right, and now I've got a really simple oval-shaped button. But the player's not going to know what this button does yet, so let's go grab our text tool. I'll click with my text tool, and then I'll type what I want it to say. Start. Now again, I have this purple color here, but I think I'll go and grab the same red color that I'm using for my border for my text. And then I'll take my text and I'll try to center it up inside of my button. And this looks pretty small and not too thrilling, so let's go ahead and play around with our text a little bit. I can change the size, I can change the font, and now this looks a little bit more eye-catching, which is good. We want the player to notice this. So this looks pretty good already. If you wanted to make this look a little bit fancier, you can do all sorts of things, like I could go to the letters and I could add a drop shadow. And that makes it look more dynamic already. I could go to my circle, my ellipse here. I could double click on that, and I might do something like a bevel and emboss, and even just by turning that setting on before playing around with it, this looks more like a button that's kind of popping up off of the flat surface and looks a little bit more clickable, which I kind of like. So without spending too much time on it, hey, it's a start button. This looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. You can spend more time perfecting yours, and again, you can do things like hand draw it. Your start button could look like just about anything you can imagine, as long as the player understands, when I click here, I'm going to start the game. So be creative. But this will work for a basic one. Let's not forget to save our progress. Now when we save this, remember it's important to go to File, Save As, change it from Photoshop to PNG, let's delete the end of this and change the ending to .png. Then just hit Save and OK, and we're good to go. So now we've got our new splash screen and our new start button. Next time we'll take these into Unity and learn how to actually create a scene and use code to create a start menu that will take you into your game. Until next time, good luck and have fun.